There it is. Right, we are back. Knights Nuggets, episode 23, after what feels like about a 17-year hiatus. You might notice that my glamorous assistant today, if you're watching this on YouTube, isn't the usual Charlie Beestone. We have somebody who is, frankly, far superior than Charlie. He'll definitely listen to this because he doesn't like it when I cheat on him on the podcast, so he'll get that. Today we're joined by Annabel Chaffey, who some of you may or may not know. She's one of our lifters at the barn, at the club. She runs through weightlifting. She's a strongman now. She's entered a couple of strong woman competitions. But our chat today is going to be mainly around Annabel's past endeavours as an athlete. So she's been to the Youth Olympics, the Winter Olympics as a bobsledder in Lillehammer.
Yeah.
Perfect. Ex-GB athlete, county level athletics, county level badminton, all the sports in school, various other bits and pieces. And like I say, now has come into the wonderful world of strength sports. So we're going to get going in a second. And basically, I'm just going to tee Annabel up and get her to tell you her story because it's a pretty interesting story. All of the things you're going to hear in the next, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes or so, just keep in mind, Annabel is only 23. Like, she has squeezed a lot into not a lot of time. So it's a really cool story to tell, but just keep that in mind. I stumbled across Annabel 3-4 years ago, there or thereabouts. I was a weightlifting coach at a CrossFit gym, and Annabel came in to do weightlifting, and we've just kind of met each other then and got along, and she's an absolute fucking lunatic, but it's all good. You'll probably get some of that through this chat. Absolute vital part of my club now. Like, turns out everyone loves her. Everyone loves hearing the stories and that sort of stuff. So I figured, why not air it to a bigger audience and put it on Knights Nuggets? So without further ado, here's Annabel. How are you, mate?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you for having me. Listen to me just waffle on.
Thanks for being here, man. We'll look forward to hearing you waffle on. Yeah, I think we just start from one and kind of go from there. So we'll just kind of we'll keep this a chat. With all of these Knights Nuggets, there is zero plan. Which we're going to natter and see where it takes us. But I think it's, like I say, you've got a hell of a story to tell from what things you told me at the barn in the past and stuff. And, you know, with the best one in the world, I think there's a lot of people could benefit from hearing your story and hearing what you've done and where you've been and come from and where you're heading to and all that kind of stuff. So let's start off. Who are you? What are you doing?
Who am I? Yeah, so, my background as an athlete, and it's really weird because, like you say, obviously, like, to me now, I've been retired like 3.5 coming up 4 years, and it's like so weird because it just feels like a completely different part of my life, but in reality it's not actually that long ago. But yeah, so the first question I always get asked is, how do you get into bobsleigh? Because obviously it's not your average everyday sport, especially like living in or growing up in little old Newbury. There's not many hills, absolutely no snow. Like, how do you get into it? So that was like from my background at school. So did every sport available, mostly did like athletics and long jump. So I was like a speed and power athlete. And basically, my PE teachers went to Bath University on a school trip, which is where British Bobsleigh and Skeleton are based, heard about a trial, came back to school and were like, we've heard about this trial where you think you'll meet the criteria. You usually say yes to like everything, so we're going to send you. So I was like, okay, like, what's it for? This is like the middle of July, you know, like it's hot. I'm in like, you know, a skirt, blazer off at school, like it's boiling. They're like, yeah, we're sending you to the bobsleigh trials. I was like, cool. Like, I've literally seen Cool Runnings once at this point in my whole life, and like that's literally my reference point of the sport. Yeah, exactly. To be fair, it's a great starting point. It's a great entry point for the sport. So I went to this trial. My parents drove me down to like Bath, did this trial, and like one really defining moment for me was I arrived and they were all like checking us all in and like what's, you know, all your details and stuff, and then they weighed us. And at that point I was 15 and I'd always been like a bit of a bigger build, like I'd done power sports, like I was clearly like stronger than a lot of other people, and like at that age it's obviously something that's quite hard to like process or like deal with, like as a young girl. And they weighed us and I was like, oh my God, like that's awful. And they weighed us and I was like weighed in at like 69 kilos or something, which now I'm like, love to be that skinny again. But like at the time I was like, oh, you know, like I feel like I'm really heavy. And then the other girls that were already there, they like came up to us and were like, oh, how heavy were you? Like, what did you weigh in at? And so I was like, oh, like whispered it like under my breath. And they were like, oh my God, that's amazing, like you're so heavy. And it was like such a weird moment, because I was like, oh my God, like I meant, like this is okay, like I'm meant to be like that. And I think from that point onwards I was really like, that actually stuck with me as like a point at which I was like, actually, like this could be for me. Because I think growing up I'd always loved sport and I'd always wanted to like be an athlete and, you know, like go to the Olympics. But by that point at like 15, you kind of go like, I don't think it's really going to happen anymore, like I've missed that boat, like I would be elite in something already if it was going to happen, kind of thing. And so then actually I was like presented with this whole new opportunity, and I was like, oh my God, like actually it's not impossible. Like, and I remember when I went home and told my mum about going to the trials, we were literally like running around the garden screaming like, oh my God, like imagine if I got selected to the national team, and imagine if I went away, and imagine if I raced, and like, oh my God, I could even go to the Olympics. And we were so excited. Like my mum's basically like me, a bit louder, a bit more excitable. So it's quite a lot, the pair of us combined. So yeah, so like it was just this whole new opportunity. And I think like for me, that's always been something that I've like tried to like hold on to, is kind of like, whatever happened, it was always going to be a funny story to tell, so I might as well just go for it. Like it is that, like, what have I got to lose? So yeah, from that point onwards, I like trialed, I had a second trial in like the November, so this was back in 2013 now, and that was like, for me, like at the same time I was like heading into year 11 at school, so like my GCSE year, so it all was like coinciding with quite a lot. And then yeah, I got selected to go on ice for the first time, and it is hilarious. Like, so you literally, like, we flew out to Austria on New Year's Day, and they like basically show you a bobsleigh, and they're like, this is a bobsleigh, this is where you sit, this is how it steers, like this is what you hold on to when you go down, like let's find a helmet that fits you. Then they like, we walk the track, and they go, so this corner goes left, this corner goes right, like whatever it is, they go, you steer here, do this, do that. And then they go, right, off you go. And then they literally just like push you off.
Outstanding. I mean, that's got to be terrifying. I mean, there's a few bits you touched in there, but like the whole journey to that, that's terrifying. Like you get plucked out of school and say, right, we're going to throw you over here and chuck you on some scales. So you kind of like adrenaline peaks and go, oh, this is really shit, I don't want to do this. And then everyone goes, that's amazing, you're amazing, this is great. And that kind of brings you back down a level again, and you're golden. Then you go away somewhere else, and they go, right, here's ice, here's how the thing goes. Like, go and have a bash. And like, runnings, you kind of know the ins and outs. Like, could go tits up, could be absolutely great. But like, how did you feel going into that? Like when they just said, off you go.
Yeah, like it was quite stressful, because we were all like paired up, and I was with another girl, and she was older than me, so for the first 2 days she drove, so I was sat in the back. So the first time I ever went down was with someone else driving who'd never done it before, and I was literally like, don't know if anyone knows this, but I quite like control, bit of a control freak. So literally I was like, oh my God, like I'm like, what, like this is horrible. And what happens is there's like a start clock. Yeah, like there's a start clock, so you have like 60 seconds to start at the top, and you just have to like go within that 60 seconds, and then there's a timing gate at like 5 meters, and then that's what starts your time for like the whole run. So you're just like sat there literally watching a clock go like 30, 29, 28, and at some point, and to start off with, someone else just like pushes you off, you know, just so that it's a little bit slower. But it doesn't really make much difference. It probably slows you down by like 5 miles an hour, which at that point you don't notice. So yeah, that was like absolutely terrifying. You just feel when
you're at the bottom of a run, what sort of speeds are you hitting?
So like I think the fastest I went was like 132 kilometers an hour by the bottom of a run.
Absolutely not. That is terrifying.
Yeah. So like I think that if I ever go to like primary schools and talk about it, I'm always like, well, technically we used to go faster than you're allowed to drive on the motorway. So that's
like by 50 miles an hour.
Yeah, so it's quite quick.
That's got to be a big dump of adrenaline. Like,
oh my God, yeah.
We'll get back to the sort of the push-offs and how you get there. But when you're at the bottom of a run, like I'd be a shaking, quivering, crying.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, because like I say, my first trip. So the girl that I was paired with, she drove the first 2 days, and obviously over those 2 days I was like going over what it would be like for me, and I was like, oh, she, you know, this is what happens on this corner, and was starting to get an idea of it, but it was so in my head. And I remember one of the older guys that had come out to help being like, you'll be fine, just do it, because I was really debating, because there were a couple of people who said, actually, I don't want to drive, and I was really debating, like, I'm not sure I want to. And he was like, just do it, like, at least do one run, like, if you crash, like, you don't have to do it again, like, just try it. And then I remember he was at the bottom when I did my very first run driving, and I was like, oh, it was an insane high. I literally like bounced out the sled and was like, oh my God, like, this is so good.
Running to the top, that's awesome. That's got to be a feeling, like, that's a feeling that most people are never going to experience. Like,
yeah. And it's like, it's scary though, because then it becomes addictive. And it is the high, obviously, that you then start chasing. And I think, yeah, like, I mean, that's something that now, fast forward, I still struggle with, is like, once you've had highs like that and you've experienced things like that, trying to find like the extraordinary in the ordinary now, in like day-to-day life, like as an adult, like I go to work, I come to the gym, like I see my friends. It's really hard to adjust when you've lived some like crazy lifestyle and experience, and it wasn't all glamorous, like, don't get me wrong, like half of it is awful and really unglamorous, but like there's something in that that's so hard to then come to terms with, like afterwards, in like losing that like passion and excitement. And when you've experienced the extremes, it's so hard to then, you know, like narrow down your experiences again.
A lot of the people that listen to this are sporty. They compete in some form or other, be that weightlifting, strongman, bobsled, who knows, we might have a bobsled listen, never know. But I feel like people are competitive. So I think, irrelevant of sport, if you've had that taste of competitiveness, that's a real thing. And then like, if that's paired in with adrenaline, I kind of hark back, like now I do strongman and weightlifting and that sort of stuff, but I hark back to sports I used to play, rugby and various martial arts and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I really am, what's the word? I get what you're saying with that whole, I miss the adrenaline. You know, there's something about being on a rugby pitch and you got 80 minutes of just warring out with people, or, you know, being in a cage or a ring or on a judo mat and fighting and doing that sort of thing. There's something that doesn't quite hit the spot. So like sort of coming out of it. It's the thing I struggle when I retired from like decent level sports, but I just kind of accepted the fact I'm old and fat and broken, and now I just lift weights because it's fun. Like there was a real, for me personally, it was a real downer for that. It took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that I'm not doing that anymore. I was quite a lot older than you when that happened. So like, obviously when that happened for you, you've been retired, like I say, about 4 years. So you would have been 19, 20. Like, as someone so young, how did that hit you? And like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, so that was quite a hard point for me. So the retirement and like my exit from sport wasn't good. So in the summer of, so I'd raced at the Youth Olympics February 2016. That then following season, so like the winter of 2016, sort of beginning of 2017, I went away on my first senior training camps and races, and I got my first senior cap in a Europa Cup race, which is one of the international circuits, in the January of 2017. And then basically I never heard anything ever again from British bobsleigh. That summer, it was out in the news that basically they ran into financial difficulties as an NGB, which meant that they had to cut all development program funding. So at that point I was on a development squad. Basically I was training, there was like four or five other girls in that squad, and we'd mostly been all out on the season together, and we were all like learning to drive, and like it was an amazing season, and like got some great friends from it and stuff. And then so that got announced, they cut all the development program funding, and then in September 2017 they cut world class performance funding for women. So that's the National Lottery funding, like UK sport funding. And they only cut the women's. That was obviously like 8 months before the Pyeongchang Games in 2018. So the senior crew, they've crowdfunded their way to Pyeongchang, but just purely because of like the sport is expensive, right? Like it's like 60k to buy a decent sled. Like A, I didn't have that kind of cash, and B, like I was still learning, you know, I kind of like, you wouldn't put like a learner or a new driver in, you know, like a nice Porsche or like a, you know, a fancy BMW really, like you wouldn't go into a car like that because, you know, you still hit the curbs and whatever. Like it's the same in bobsleigh, like I was still learning, I hadn't driven all the tracks that there were. So, you know, my journey to reach my peak as a senior athlete was meant to be sort of like 4, 6 years, 8 years time. Really, I'd had conversations about aiming for 2022, which is obviously hard at the moment because that's literally like 4 months away. So knowing that like that was once what I was aiming for and should have been out there, like they're actually out there at the moment for the test event on the track. So like having all of that sort of taken away from me, not by choice, that was like one of the hardest points really, because yeah, I was 19, I'd made decisions like not to go to uni because I thought I was going to be an athlete full time. You know, I was working part time, you know, at home, I was living still with mum and dad. Like my whole life was like revolved around training and being an athlete, and then to just have that taken away was awful. And I remember actually it got quite bad at one point, to the point where I was really fortunate, like so many family and friends were like so supportive, and like we had friends come out and watch me at the Youth Olympics and stuff and was so invested, but I couldn't face telling them that I wasn't doing it anymore. So I like basically asked my mum and dad if it was okay if I basically sent like an email to like our friends and family that just sort of said like, this is the situation, like I'm basically no longer doing the sport. I'd appreciate it like if you didn't ask me about it, because it's just that constant, like everyone was always like, oh, you know, how's bobsleigh going, like blah blah blah, and you're just like, I just don't want to talk about it, like because I was in denial about it myself. So like having to then try and obviously like deal with everyone else's emotions, and like they don't necessarily understand the context, because I think that, and that's one thing that's so apparent, is that like if you don't get elite sport, it's another world. Like it's so hard to get. It operates entirely differently to like business or, you know, like normal
lifestyle. I've
yeah.
never been at a point where I could consider myself elite. Like I'll make that very, very clear. But I have worked with a number of elite athletes through different sports as a coach, and it's savage. It's absolutely savage. It becomes a job. It's your entire life. It's your career. So having that from under you is absolutely savage.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is it's so like now I work with people who are facing redundancy, so I'm a career consultant, so I support them through that transition, and obviously that's like a really big moment for a lot of people, like a loss of identity, like, you know, it's not something that's been planned, it's, you know, taken out of their control. So I can really relate to that, and I have actually been made redundant myself as well. But how I say that like sport is different from that is your job doesn't tend to, I know that like people struggle with work-life balance and all of that like stuff, but sport is who you socialize with, it's how you socialize, it's how you literally eat, it's how you drink, it's like, you know, what social events you go to, it's whether you get paid or not. You know, like with a job, you get paid for it, so there's a reward on what you give to it. With sport, there's not. So there's nothing that's as like all consuming as being an athlete is, and so yeah, so when you lose that, it's really, really hard. And I didn't face into it probably for like nearly 2 years. I kind of like fully brushed it under the carpet because I was, at the time, like I say, working part-time. I kind of was like really practical, and I was like, well, I've got a job, I'll just work full-time, like it's fine, move on, I'm not doing bobsleigh anymore, whatever. And then like, yeah, like I say, 18 months later, I was like, holy shit, like I'm not okay, like I haven't processed this, and, you know, at like 19, 20, that's a lot.
Yeah. So, big crash. Like, was there, what resources, if anything, were available to you then? Like, was there anything? I mean, obviously, you know, Team GB lost all their funding, so I'm assuming Team GB weren't amazing around.
Yeah, so British Bobsleigh Skeleton is the national governing body. They just cut our funding. There wasn't any support from them because I was on world class. Because I wasn't on world class performance funding. You don't get access to like performance lifestyle advisors or like nutrition, S&C coaches, all of that. So you don't get access to that because I'm not funded. So basically, the long and short of it was nothing / my mum and dad. That was the support that I was left. And like, yeah, that was, you know, after having sacrificed a lot, and a lot of like, you know, 15 to like 20, they're pretty good years. Like, you know, and I'm not saying I didn't have a blast during them, but
one of the things I wanted to sort of weigh into this podcast is that this all happened before you were 19. Like, I really struggle to get my head around that. Like, most people are still in full-time education until then. So like, this whole thing happened. You were dragged out of school, sent to Austria to go slide down a mountain in a tube. And then you went, yeah, we're going to build you up for all this hype. We're going to get you over there. Then you went to Lillehammer, you did the Youth Olympics, and like, we'll go through that story in a minute, but you did all that stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, actually, no, you can go back to Civiland now. Like, actually, we're not going to use you anymore because, you know, money's gone.
Yeah.
It's a fucking hell of a thing to deal with. And like, from 19, I remember when I was 19, and I guarantee everyone else in this podcast, when they were 19, you don't know your ass from your elbow. You just sort of wake up and do stuff. Like, you know, your biggest worry is like, where you're going to meet your mates on Friday night. And that's kind of, all of a sudden, this whole new world has opened up to you where none of your friends are in it. Like, none of your friends from school are in that world. So all of a sudden, the sacrifices you make there when they're going out and, you know, just chilling at the local park, or when you're old enough and they start going to the pubs, or whatever it is you're doing from 15, 16, 17, 18, you know, they're inviting you out. Do you want to come for a meal and a drink? I can't. I've got to get to bed early. I'm on this. I've got training in the morning. I'm off to another camp. I'm off to this. I'm off to the other. Like, you talk about sacrifices you make, and on the surface of things, people listening going like, you know, you just didn't go out a couple of times. But again, it goes back to the elite athlete thing of, it wasn't a couple of times. You just don't fucking go out. Like, your whole world is your next training session. It's you're finding margins. You enter the fucking Olympics, like, at whatever level that is, whatever sport it is, the Olympics is the Olympics. That doesn't change, be that youth or senior or whatever it's going to be. Like, you're literally chasing percentage margins. So everything you do to add to that performance is a thing. And all of those things are sacrifices. So I think that's the thing that people don't fully recognize.
Yeah, like, I mean, for me, so my brother's birthday's the 16th of December, and we were always away because it's the winter. So I missed both his 18th and his 21st birthdays.
Mate.
Like,
yeah, but
he's my big brother. Like, we are so close.
There you go. I think that's the big thing, right? And I know you speak about your brother highly in the gym and all that kind of stuff. So I know the relationship you have. I didn't know that. That's, yeah, but there you go. You talk about sacrifices. It's not just a night out with the girls. It's 18th.
No, it's
you know?
yeah.
Talk about that. Like, what was your 18th birthday? Because obviously you were still in this world when you were 18, right?
Yeah. So my 18th birthday, so that was like 2 months after I got back from the Youth Olympics. So that was my last year of school. So I was taking my A-levels. So I'd missed nearly 3 months of school. So I remember I went away for training and racing camps on the 27th of or the 26th of November. I didn't go back to school. The next time I was in school was the 13th of January.
Wow. Nice.
Which was amazing. Like, at that time I was like, yeah, I've been missing school. But also, like, yeah, that's like of my A-level year. Like, that was, yeah, I basically wasn't there. Yeah, so my 18th birthday, my birthday's April, so I came back from the games, went straight into like revising for my A-levels. I did go out on my 18th birthday. I did make sure of that. But yeah, like, that was like one night in like, you know, a couple of years.
You've just come back to the Olympics, so I feel like that's allowed. But if that was if your 18th birthday was 2 months before the Olympics, that'd have been a very different night out.
100%. Well, that Christmas, like before, so like the Christmas that I was like 17, you know, and like house parties and all of that, like I was teetotal that Christmas. Like I just didn't, you know, I was literally like no seconds, teetotal, like it was a bit shit. I love food as well, so it was a bit shit.
I mean, you're saying teetotal, as well you should be, because you were 17. And
Yeah, of course. Sorry. Yes.
legal.
I'm well.
I'm not getting done. Don't drink routine, just say no kids.
No.
We've all done it. I have vivid memories of my dad feeding me bottles of hooch when I was about 13. So yeah, it happens. Just say no kids, and then you look at me. I'll turn out all right. I've got a shit face and a shit house beard. It's great. But mate, that's a hell of an insight. Like, and like I said, I wanted to caveat that again. This all happened before you were 19. So like, let's go back to Austria. So your first kind of thing there, obviously you've been driven down a couple of times. Now you're in the thing and you've driven it. You've jumped out the other end, jumped all over your coach. You want to go straight back to the top again, do it again. Like from that point, when was your first sort of big race, or not even big race? When was your first?
So that was the January. 2 months later, in the March. So this was the March before I sat my GCSEs in the June. I went out and raced at the British Championships. And I was the youngest ever female to race at the British Championships.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah, and it was. So I was 15. So mostly they had to change the insurance rules like just before I slid for the first time, because it used to be like you had to be 16, because they knew that I was like eligible to go to the Youth Olympics. They like changed it to 15 so that I could slide, and there was me and another guy who was also 15 that they like sort of managed to get us out on that for. So yeah, so I raced at the British Champs. I think we came like 4th overall, which was like insane because there was like a woman there, because it's quite a heavy military sport as well, and there was a woman there from like the RAF who it was like her last British Champs she was racing at, and she'd been driving bobsleighs like longer than I'd been alive at that point. So like she was like amazing, like so much like knowledge, and like yeah, so it was quite an eye-opening experience. And like yeah, so that was actually like 2 months after, like I could count the number of runs on like one hand kind of thing.
And you came 4th.
So, yeah. So I mean, there wasn't exactly like hundreds of people that I was racing against, but I'll take it.
Oh, mate, 100%. 4's awesome for your first race, and the first one that preliminary things before that, or did you just get thrown straight in?
Literally straight in, because obviously because it's, you know, such a tiny sport, it's not like you have like county qualifications and then like regionals, do you know what I mean? Like the only competitions are at that national or international level. So
shit, that's awesome.
Yeah. So and then from there, that then following winter, so like that's the 2014-2015 season, that was when I got selected for the youth team. And so up until this point, so my first training camp in the British Champs, I'd raced 2-man, and I was the pilot in the 2-man. Then heading into that following winter, when I was selected to the youth team, the International Federation basically created this new discipline called monobob. So obviously you think like cool runnings is like 4-man, then there's obviously 2-man, and then they made monobob, which is for one person. So it was designed to encourage like increased participation basically on an international level, and they wanted to try it for youth athletes. So you as an athlete, you pushed it from the back and then you jumped in, and it was literally like a little 1-seat bobsleigh, and then you drove it down yourself.
I've just got this image of like an IKEA food tray down the side of a hill, like sledding with your mates.
Yeah, a little bit, not far off.
That's the image I've got in my head, and it's amazing.
Yeah, not far off. So that's then what I started racing in. So most of my international races were, apart from one, all of my international races were in monobob. So I got to like pilot and push, and yeah, you do it all, which is fun.
That's really
cool. So then that first season I had 3 international races and ended that season ranked as world number 1.
Yeah, you did. Go on, Chaffey.
Yeah. So that was like, honestly, it was just like an insane experience, because by that point I was like, I really felt like I was living my dream, because like I said, like I'd got to the point where I'd never thought I was going to be elite, and then here I was like spending like weeks in Norway and going to Germany and like traveling, and it was just insane. Like it was an amazing experience.
That's
yeah.
Well, number one, like that's a really cool thing. Like getting your head around that must have been like what that must have put you up on such a high, like through this whole thing, which that just makes that down like a lot. Makes it down a lot tougher.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So,
it was,
we'll go for that. So like obviously you hit world number one in monobob.
Yeah, monobob. Yeah.
And then obviously competed at the Youth Olympics, which is fucking massive anyway. Like I've had this conversation with people in the past, like irrelevant of like age, like getting to the Olympics. I don't think people understand how fucking good you have to be to compete at the Olympics. Like even if you come absolute dead last at the Olympics, you're still in the top % in the whole world for that thing. So like getting there is massive. And then obviously again, I keep harping into this whole period of time where it's like really short period of time. But like when you came out of it, obviously you've kind of spoken quite candidly about the drop and the kind of the fall from that and the feelings and all that stuff. What got you through that? Obviously it was yourself, your mum and your dad, and you know a close group of friends around you that kind of knew not to ask questions, but you could lean on if you needed. Like what got you through? Was there like another sport you jumped into? Did you get any like what was there?
So that sort of like 18-month period where I like hadn't really faced into like what happened and stuff, I really struggled, and basically I tried going back to sport and I just didn't love it anymore. And that was really hard because I'd always been sporty. Even before bobsleigh, I did literally every sport available at school. So to literally try anything and just not love it, I was so lost as to like who I was, because people knew me as sporty, you know, like I won the awards at school for sport, and you know everyone was like, oh, she does PE, and like that was who I was, even regardless of then being like an elite athlete. So to then literally like not enjoy it anymore was like heartbreaking really. And I did go back to badminton for a bit, and I played for like a local team, and I did enjoy it, but just didn't feel the same. And I tried hockey, and I played for like Newbury, and again like made friends and stuff and had fun, and I did love like the team side of it, but I couldn't find anything that like scratched the itch in the right way. And again, I do think that's all tied into like, you know, hockey's fun, but it's not exactly like adrenaline thrilling kind of thing.
I shoot in a roller skate.
Yeah, exactly. So I found that really, really hard. And yeah, for nearly a year probably, I was like really inactive and just didn't really exercise, because I just didn't want to, because it just wasn't the same. And yeah, so then it's only really been in like the last year and a half, really year, that I've like obviously in that as well, I obviously like tried coming to the gym with you and like was a member for a bit, and then I needed to take some time out to took time out last year obviously to like process some of the stuff that I'd been through and like face into some of the experiences I'd had as an athlete, because that was part of it. So I obviously came across you in the gym because I was like, I'd had to be in the gym for bobsleigh training, and I was like, oh well, that's an element of the sport that I can still do, like I can still lift heavy weights. And I'd kind of discovered as well that I was quite good at it, you know, I've got like quite a good body shape for lifting, and I was strong, and so I was like, oh well, that to me makes sense. So obviously I like came across you and like lifted and stuff, and then like I say, I did, in the end I did reach out, and I have seen a therapist to help support and try and process some of what I've been through, and as part of that I kind of realized that like not necessarily being in the gym was like the best environment for me, because I thought it was like a good place to be because it was something I knew and I was familiar with, and then actually it was like, I think I was kind of probably there for like the wrong reasons, and what I needed to like process and heal basically. So like I took time out, and then obviously I like came back probably like this time last year, and like I say, it's really only been in like this last year again that I've like fallen back in love with sport, and I finally feel like I'm in a place where I'm like, I can do it for fun. because that's such a hard part of retiring. Is not that I didn't have fun whilst I did bobsleigh, but there was always a purpose to it. Like I say, it was like my job. It was like I had targets to hit. I needed to be the best. I had to win, like, because you're always striving for the next big thing. And so then when you just have to come out and do sport for fun, just because you want to, like, that's such a mindset shift. Yeah. And like, wait, what? Like, it doesn't matter if I have a shit session. Like, wait, like what? You know, like, and you know, I'm completely now comfortable with that. Like, you see it in the gym. You know, I come in.
It's weird, like having this conversation with you now. Obviously, I've kind of seen this through the last sort of 4 years, because you must have stumbled into the gym around the point where this whole thing finished, like 19, 20. So I kind of saw that point there. We hadn't had the conversations then because we just met. It's not the thing you lay on the table straight away. But now, obviously, knowing you like I do now, and we have very candid conversations around things, I've seen that whole kind of shift. It's really interesting. From a kind of coach's perspective, you can tell when someone's invested in the sport or not, or when they're just kind of going through the motions. And it was very much, you know, when we were sort of training over at Windsor at the first place, it was very much you kind of come through, you'd throw some weight around a little bit, and then session's over and be like, okay, bye, see you next time. And it was, you know, it was all very regimented, and it was that, which makes a lot of sense because it was all very regimented leading into that. So that was, as you say, your obvious go-to coping strategy was, well, I'll keep my regimen. You kind of did that. And then obviously we had a very candid conversation when, you know, everything kind of came to a head a little while back, and he said, look, I just need to fucking not, I want to go back and try hockey and athletics and do all that sort of stuff and get back into things. And then, you know, it's kind of come back on your terms and like, actually, I've really missed lifting. And then you kind of come back and you competed and done all that kind of good stuff. But like I say, the shift from when I first met you to just the last year, 2 years, has been massive. Like, you can see it. Like, you're just a different person. You're a lot happier. You hold yourself higher. You have a laugh in the gym. It's not quite so... You're not in the gym to do a job, like you say. You said it yourself. You're in the gym now because it's fun and you enjoy it and you like the environment and you've got some really good friends here, and it becomes part of your social life as well as being a sport you enjoy, as well as kind of scratching the itch a little bit. Like for me, I don't think we've really had this conversation so much, but like for me, my absolute proudest moment as your coach was watching you in that strongman competition. It was fucking awesome. Like when you see someone's got that spark. I don't think anyone ever loses that competitive spark, but seeing it ignite in someone again is badass. And like, you gunned yourself through those events with a dicky wrist and you just went for it. Absolutely went for it, tooth and nail. And I think you could have left you could have gone through the whole day and we could have not had a conversation at the end of it, and I would have seen you give 100%. But like, the fact you even come up to me at the end of it, it's like, I fucking loved that. It was awesome. And seeing that spark, and like, I don't think you left, there wasn't a single part of that day where you weren't either in the zone or smiling. It was awesome. It's a really cool thing to see. So sort of looping back, kind of going through all of the things you did when you left bobsleigh, going through obviously the counselling you had, which is great, and everything through that. Like, what's been the biggest kind of turning point in terms of like going from up here to down here to back up and enjoying sport again? Like, what was the biggest thing for you personally that helped?
God, that's such a big question.
It's a massive question. I only ask because there's a lot of people who are going to listen to this who can relate. There's a lot of people that
I mean, I think so I was like fortunate enough that one of the jobs that I had was with a company called Lane 4, and they actually have a lot of ex-athletes that worked there, and they ran a program to basically support transitioning athletes, and that was like amazing. Basically, just honestly, it was basically like group therapy. Like, we'd all sit in a room and we all did different sports, like, but that wasn't the point. Like, the point was there were other people who got my experience and who understood it, and you know, you could talk about things and they understand the complexities of like funding and how it works and selection processes and, you know, and so you could just like share. And I, you know, like, sounds so cringe, but it was really like a proper like light bulb moment, and that was where I like faced into actually like what I'd been through and that I wasn't okay, but also kind of was like really like empowering, and that I was like, I don't always have to be like this. Like, there is like it sounds really cringe, but like there is life after sport, and that for athletes is a really hard thing to face into, and it doesn't feel real at the time, like when you're actually going through it. And I think one thing that I sort of found really powerful or like hard at the time was the whole identity thing, because I was Annabel the athlete, you know, that's how everyone at school knew me, like that's how, you know, the teachers knew me, that's how I was to family friends, that's how I was to family. I was an athlete, and it's because as well it's sort of like self-perpetuating, because everyone around me, you know, you don't know that many athletes, so everyone around me was like, oh my god, this is Annabel, she's an athlete, because like that's really cool, and that's how you're introduced, so then it feeds it more and you believe it more, and I actually was. And you forget then that actually like I was Annabel, like the daughter, the sister, the friend, you know, the student before I was an athlete. And you know, I'm still a sister, I'm still Annabel the daughter, I'm still Annabel the friend now. But when you're in sport, you just lose like touch with all of those other identities. And I think like that's basically what, for me, I think the like last 3-4 years have been about, is like trying to reconnect with those other versions of me, because like, yeah, like I say, you just sort of like lose them, and they're not like in the forefront of your mind, like they're not, you know, like I say, like I wasn't Annabel the sister when I wasn't there for my brother's 18th and 21st birthdays. Like that, I was Annabel the athlete. That was the identity that won out. And actually, like the reality is, you know, I'm gonna be a sister until like the day I die. Like that is actually probably more important that I focus on that.
At the time, you ran about the athlete, and
Yeah.
you had these things to hit, and you didn't know what was around the corner. So at the time, all of those choices you made were the right choice.
Yeah.
I have no doubt in my mind that your brother would have understood those choices completely, because this is what you're doing. This is your path. You've got the Olympics to train for, and maybe another Olympics, and you know you don't know what's around the corner. So there's all of those things. You make choices based on what's in front of you, right?
Yeah.
Hindsight, a beautiful thing. You look back now and you go, maybe I should have, maybe I did, maybe I
could. And I think, you know, and I don't regret the decisions that I made, because like you say, at the time they were what was right for the situation I was in. I think like in coming out of sport, it's more been that I'm like, oh shit, yeah, like I am other things. And actually I think it's like that's the whole kind of like I'm still worth something, because I think when you lose your sport as an elite athlete, you kind of go, well, who am I? Like it's a proper like I don't have anything to offer. And I think for me, like getting out of that place was actually, yeah, like connecting on a really basic level with like, no, I still am things, like I still have something to offer to the world as a friend, as a daughter, like whatever it was, whatever that role was. And I think that is something that's really hard, and it's not easy, right? Like I still struggle with it, because I think as an athlete you carry yourself so much on like you do have an ego, like you have to have like that mentality that like you're the best and you're like a bit invincible and stuff, because you can't not show that. So, you know, like I used to walk down the street and in my head I'd be like, oh well, I'm an athlete, like I've been world #1, like blah blah blah. And then you kind of come into civilian life and you're like, you go into like meetings or whatever at work, and in your head it's kind of like you kind of try and carry yourself in the same way, and then you're like, but all I can do is like run really fast or like push a heavy object, and everyone else is like, what the fuck, like that doesn't mean anything, like what, you're going to push this office chair really fast like in the meeting room, like and so you really, yeah, you just like question your value, I think.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. It's I'd never really thought of it that. That's a really bizarre world to be in, I guess, isn't it?
Because you've been like built up.
I've always been well, so for me it's, well, I no longer compete, or well I compete because I enjoy it, but like I'm nowhere near the level I was at. So for me, I took all of my attention from myself competing to you. So all of a sudden now I do coaching, and be that weightlifting or powerlifting or strongman, or you know, I've got a few sort of personal clients I train for various bits and pieces, and rugby players and fighters, and I train athletes now, so I'm still within that world. But yeah, sort of getting out of that world and going into the normal world, I guess. Yeah, that must have been really shit.
Yeah, it's really, because you're literally no one else in this meeting like gives a shit that I can like pick something heavy up.
Yeah.
like, what is that? What, like, and then you're like, that's what my whole life's been about. So like, now I'm like this is really awkward because like, where do I go from here? So yeah, it's a journey for sure.
Hell of a journey, and like I say, all of this in a really short space of time. So first, like, thank you for sharing that. That was really, really cool. And I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of insight into things now. I don't know, I feel like it's important to tell these stories and to listen to them and understand, again, for want of a less twee way of putting it, to understand people's journeys through life from wherever your background is. So that's really, really cool. And like, I genuinely appreciate you coming on, pouring your heart out. That was really cool. So with all of that, like, I feel like the question on everybody's lips. Now, I know the answer to this question because it was one of the first questions I asked you. Have you met actual bobsled team from Jamaica?
Yes. So, so I've raced at the Calgary track. So that's where like cool runnings, like the Olympics that cool runnings is about. It was in Calgary. So I've raced at that track. I actually won on that track, which is really cool. And then, yes, so at our Youth Olympics, there was a youth Jamaican guy there. And I do have a picture somewhere with him with the GB team and hard-boiled eggs, and the guy from Jamaica holding a hard-boiled egg as well. And then at that games as well, who'd come out to support him was the brakeman from the 1988 Calgary team, which is who the character of like Sanka is based on. So that was really cool. Yeah.
That's the best thing. That's really cool. Career highlight. That's it right there.
Yeah, like literally I was like, oh, Pete now, I don't matter.
Like world number one or Olympic athlete, anything like that. I've met actual Sanka and his lucky egg. Outstanding.
All I need in life.
That's amazing. So we could probably tail this off now. We've been talking for almost an hour, which is really cool. So we tail this off. I'm going to put you right on the spot, and I'm going to say, if anyone watching this or listening to this is in a kind of similar boat, not necessarily to the same level like Olympics, but if they're in a similar boat of like suffering maybe injury and having to retire from their sport or funding cuts, whatever it may be, if someone's leaving a sport and kind of in a similar sense to yourself, what one bit of advice or more bits of advice would you give anyone dealing with this?
I think, first of all, you're actually not alone. I think, like I say, like I've sort of touched on it, is like the world of sport is so different. So you can feel quite isolated, even though your like family and friends are there, like supporting you. Like to some extent, they just don't get it. But like there are other athletes out there who do. So I would definitely encourage you to like find them, because they're out there and they'll be feeling the same things and they'll be asking the same questions. Yeah, so that for me is like quite a big thing. I think that was really powerful about it. Like, and I was really fortunate, like one of my really close friends from bobsleigh went through the same thing with me. So I, that was a massive like support at the time. And it does get better. Some days are still rubbish. Some days are like, it's fine. And I do feel like entirely like I've closed that chapter. But that's life, I think, is like, I've like realised, if anything, that life is messy, and it's a part of like a messy chapter of life, and there'll be more. We always joke about it in the gym that I make some questionable life choices, and I do, and I will, and that's life. So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, 100%. You're not alone is a great bit of advice, because you're not. It's be dealing with sort of a sport thing, or like you say, career loss redundancies, as you do now, and you deal with, it's important that you realise there's a lot of people in the boat with you. I think that's a big thing to carry, 100%. Awesome. I think we can finish out here. That's awesome. I really, really appreciate this, Annabel. Thank you very, very much.
Great to chat.
In this sort of sense, obviously we chat in the gym and we have a laugh and all that sort of stuff, but it's nice to really sort of scratch below the surface, so to speak, and just kind of share it. And like I said, right at the sort of top end of this chat, I think it's a story that a lot of people will resonate with and a lot of people will understand. And be that from itself as like elite sport to people just, being redundant or going through changes and that kind of thing. It all kind of sits in the same vein. Yeah. So yeah, awesome. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Charlie.
Absolute pleasure. I will end the recording. We're going to get this uploaded, and if anybody's got questions or wants to kind of come to you, where can they find you? What are your Instagram?
I can. What is my Instagram handle? Great question. I should probably know that. I spend enough time on it.
I'll fill where you find it. So Annabelle's great. She's amazing. She'll help everybody out, and she's really, really cool. But she doesn't know her own admin, which is awesome.
So my Instagram handle is Annabel ANNABEL _Chaffey CHAFFEY. So find me there. Yeah. There you go. Happy to answer questions.
I'll put that in the show notes for this podcast because we have show notes. I'll stick it in there. So any questions, anything you want to speak to Annabel about, anything like that, just slide your way into her DMs, as well as all the other questionable people that do the same. And she'll get back to you. But like I say, I say it twice, I'll say it again. I really, really appreciate you sharing that. It was not an easy journey you've been through, and I know I've been there to see the last little bit of it. So it's really cool to kind of dig under the iceberg, so to speak, and see what's what. So yeah, really appreciate it.
No worries.
I'll see you at training.
See you at training. Thanks, Charlie.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Bye.